Hello, welcome to Box Board. Tonight we are going to look at the Emerald Empire, the essential guide to Rokugan for the rather excellent Legend of the Five Rings role-playing game. It's by FFG. It's been out in the States for a few weeks. This is as fresh as I could get it in the UK. It takes a couple of weeks to get here, and it is awesome. Now, as you would expect from FFG, it is very, very good quality, and basically what this is we're going to go through it, but basically this is a book that gives you an idea of what Rokugan is like, so what the Emerald Empire actually is like, and breaks it down a little bit. So it's a really good background book and really good source book. So there's basically 7 chapters. The introduction we shall look at in a minute. There's 7 chapters discounting the introduction. The introduction we'll have a look at now, and then we'll go through the chapters bit by bit. So first of all, it goes through a little bit of an overview about what's in the book. This basically is a source book, so it gives you ideas about, tells you background to the culture, tells you background to what's going on in the history of Rokugan, and it really is quite enriching. What I've read so far is really cool. So right at the get-go, you get a nice map, which if you've got the starter pack will look very familiar to you. It's got in it, chapter 1 is about strongholds of power, so basically castles and palaces, and tells you a little bit about how diplomacy and warfare work in the Empire. Chapter 2 is about centres of trade, so this is about cities and towns, places where there is trade being done, and it also tells you a little bit about the nature of law and enforcement. Heart of the Empire is chapter 3, which is about villages and farms and the rural aspect, and it gives you some information about how samurai interact with different classes of peasant throughout that are found. Then we've got in chapter 4, we've got sacred spaces, and there's a bit in it about how shrines work within Rokugan, and basically then it does a little bit about some of the forbidden practices that are in Rokugan. You also get in chapter 5, then you get the paths of enlightenment, and this is really about the monks and the priests and how they function in society. Then we get chapter 6, which is the wilds, and it's where the wild places within the bounds. So it's the forest, mountains, coastlines. It's basically describing the places where civilization and wild places meet. So, and it's quite interesting. And then chapter 7's got some new player options. Dotted throughout the book, you get these little boxes which are adventure seeds. They've got a hook, which basically introduces. Then there's rising actions, the next bit of the adventure, what happens next, and then the climax is how the adventure ends. And this is quite useful for GMs. There's a really nice section on the history of Rokugan, how it worked, and what happened in it. There's some stuff in the sidebars about how the calendar works and stuff like that. And you are getting you'll get the impression as we flick through this, this is very much a fluff book. It tells you an awful lot of stuff that's going on within this world, and gives the world a real richness. So that's quite cool. Strongholds of Power is an interesting one, because basically what you've got is some really interesting artwork as ever, but you've got bits about how the castles work, what the lords are like, and there's some bits about all kinds of details, so things like court banners, the role of jesters, who lives in the court, servants and a bit about them, then notable figures and these different figures that you might encounter in an adventure, which is really quite interesting and gives you some pause for thought. Then there's a bit about bushi artisan students and different sort of key figures and how they live in court, what it is like. So the servants, the castle guests, things like that. Interesting things like where do you put blades? Where are they put? Because these, one of the things that's important in Legend of the Five Rings is courtesy and the way things are done. So this gives you the opportunity to sort of get a better idea of that and get that bit more detail. Then you've got a bit about what castles are like. We've got a map of Castle of Bright Dawn and what the different bits of the castles are like and what they do. Get a little bit about Genpeiku. Forgive my pronunciation. Then we've got a little bit about different places as well. So then we get contested truths, and these are call-out boxes again from storytelling point of view. Then we've got our first adventure seed, and this is a fairly typical one. So they're not in massive detail, but there's a good bit of detail. You also get with that, so you'll often get characters as well. So you get characters that you can use. So this one's a steward, and they've got a bit of background, a bit of their story, and then what their stats are, which is quite nice. Then we get into the things like the Scorpion Clan's place that they're in, and we get a flavour of some of the characters there and some of the things that might stories that might take place there. So you get that a lot. So these seeds are all the way through, and there's quite a lot of seeds in the book. So from a GM point of view, this is actually really quite nice because it gives you things that you can bring in. We also get a bit about diplomacy and how that works, and regional court practices, which I find really interesting. So if you're in a crab court, there'll be things that will be different to, say, a scorpion court. The quirks and mannerisms that'll be different. Then we get a bit about war, how that works. Then we get a little bit about examples of war from the history and what happened and how that's impacting things. And then we get the attitudes of the different clans towards warfare. So this is all quite useful. I think what you're actually looking at here is a book that you look at just that chapter alone. You've got so much more richness going on. Just from one bit on castles, we have got you've got a real sense of this world and how it works, and so much more detail that's available to you than you had even with the core rulebook, which is actually very good itself. Chapter 2 centers trade. We've got some really nice, well-written stuff that gives you that flavour, gives you that sense of the thing. Then it goes into the different orders and who they are, and even the place of theatre, a bit about alcohol, about food, the structure of cities, how they happen, map, a bit about firefighters because they can come into it, and how to navigate and gangs, the underworld, a little bit about crime. Then we go into some specific cities, and you then get some bits and pieces about structure, and what they're like, and we get an adventure seed, another city, an adventure seed, and we get a character. This pattern recurs all over the place. So we get a city, a place, and you get a character, and you get an adventure seed that would fit that place or may fit somewhere else. Then we do harbours, what they do, what they're like, all that kind of stuff. Whenever you're looking at harbours, one of the things that you're going to encounter is gaijin. So a little bit about what gaijin are, what the attitudes are towards it, and then we've got little bits and pieces here that we can use. We've got a seed that we can use, we've got characters we can use, different cities again, different seeds that can be used, and you get a lot of seeds. So then we get this crime and punishment and a bit about magistrates, which is really interesting because it's quite a good route for an adventure, and you can see a bit about how to play Emerald Magistrates, what they do, what they're concerned about, how that works, and then a little bit about what happens. We go in then to the Heart of the Empire, chapter 3, which is really about the rural aspects of life. Not the centre of attention most of the time, even though it's really important within the Empire. And you get a little bit about it. And again, we've got bits and pieces it's enriching our understanding of this, telling us more and more about different aspects of the culture. Just tiny little things that make a massive difference to enriching that world, because in this world it's very alien, it's very different, and actually as a GM it helps you to have that depth of knowledge that you can actually really start to explore and bring it to life. So we get a map of the Laughing River village, and then we get it goes into some of the different bits and pieces, what the agriculture is like, what people grow, what people make, how they get by, and we get then our seed, and once again we're starting to see these seeds develop. So we get adventure seeds, and I think we get some characters, but there's not as many in the rural. Then we get a bit about the interactions between samurai and their lessers, and this is quite interesting because this is a bit that's quite difficult for people to roleplay a lot of the time, I think. And it goes into it and tells you a little bit about how that works. Then we get a little bit about foreigners, which is interesting. We get a bit about travelling, and what it's like and how it works, and then we get this idea of way stations, and again quite good fun, and a character or two and some bits and pieces. So we're getting more and more flavour, some more characters, more adventure seeds, loads of adventure seeds, some interesting little story bits, some interesting rules to bring into play. This is kind of cool. Sacred Spaces is an interesting one because there's quite a lot about the way things work within this empire and shrines and what happens. So, and how the above and the below work, and the kami, and we get a bit about the different kami and the fortunes and what they are like, and then why to visit a shrine, and stuff like that. So it's quite an interesting one. So then you get an idea of religious practices, what they're like. We get bits about superstitions, and particular superstitions that the different clans have got. We get a bit about weddings in the different clans. We get a bit about funerals, how they work, festivals, how they work, and all of this is just that adding of detail and flavour and flavour and flavour, and just you get this over and over again in this book. That's what it's predominantly about. It's about building this world. This is a world building book. So you get some really nice, interesting characters develop coming into it, but more than that, and some lovely seeds. But it's this richness that's the real strength of this world, because this is a game that's been around for a while. There's a really good world developed around it. Then we get a bit about forbidden beliefs and how they work, just a little bit, and forbidden rituals in the Maho, and the different bits and pieces. So that's quite interesting. Then we get the bit in the monks, the paths of enlightenment. So the mystery of the Shinsei, and how that, and a bit about that. The Brotherhood of the Shinsei, and well-known monastic orders. So we get a bit about the different orders, monasteries and temples. Some really interesting bits about the daily life and temple life, and encounter, what martial arts. Some pretty interesting stuff about the martial arts there. It was quite cool to read. A bit about what happens whenever you encounter monks, pilgrimages, relics, stuff like this. Loads of different bits and pieces. Again, building and deepening that richness. Characters, loads of adventure seeds. Some of them some you could really extend. Some of them are quick little things that can just add to an adventure. But great, absolutely great. And it's just loads of stuff, to be honest. Then we get into finally the sort of last bit about places, which is the wilds. And this is the one that's kind of a bit different in a lot of ways. It's a little bit harder to get your head around to some extent, but it tells you a little bit about who would be there, what it's like, natural encounters, dangers, things like that, the mountains, what they're like to travel in, but again we're getting adventure seeds and characters again, and this is quite cool. We get a bit just recurrent theme of loads and loads of different places, loads and loads of different seeds, loads and loads of different characters. This is kind of cool. You know, whenever you get down to it, you just look at it and you go, actually, this is so useful. And then lastly, we get some new player options. Now, new player options, I looked at it and I went, okay, that's interesting. So we get the Imperial families, which is kind of interesting. And we get some really unusual bits about families and how they work, or some really interesting families. But also some really interesting schools. So we get the Cartographer School, we get the Herald School, which is a type of courtier. If I can find it, we get the Schemer School, and then it gets into some of we get the Astrologer, but I'm trying to see if I can. Yeah, the Guard School, the Fortunist Monk Order. There's a lot of different schools going on here. Shinseist School. Monk Order, sorry, and then I get the ones that I find interesting were the Kitsune, which are kind of were-creature type things, and the Saboteur. And these were really interesting. These are very different. Some interesting rules around them, and I sort of looked at them and went, that could be really interesting to have in your. They could potentially be quite disruptive in your party, but it might be really interesting to have them in some parties. And then some new advantages, which are interesting enough. Some new specific passions, some new disadvantages, so some specific adversaries, and also anxieties. And finally, unless I'm badly mistaken, yeah, we get some new techniques as well. So that's quite interesting. Then we get a little bit of titles, additional titles. Now, this was something that I found actually quite interesting. So if you look at the core book, page 305, there's a little bit about status and how it works and titles. And particularly it's things that I think the Emerald Magistrate is one of the ones that comes in quite early. But this adds to it. So we've got not just now the Emerald Magistrate, we've got quite a few extra ones. So we get Advisor, Clan Magistrate, Daimo, Gunzo, Monastic Acolyte, Priest, and there's some criteria and some rules that come into it. Spy, Yojimbo, Yuriki. Again, apologies for my pronunciation. And these are quite interesting because it's another way of developing and it's another way of making the thing come to life. So overall, what do I think of this book? To be honest with you, initially I was like, oh, it's just an awful lot of fluff. But the more I've looked at it, as a GM, I think this is really essential. I think this lets you get beyond, I'm going to download this off a website, or I'm going to and use it. It gets you beyond the starter boxes. It gets you beyond buying adventures into generating your own adventures, and it really allows you to do that because you've got so much of a world built around this. It becomes an awful lot more easy to do that and to really tailor towards your party that you're GMing for. The adventure seeds, there are so many of them and they're pretty diverse, to be honest, that it's just a wonderful resource. The detail around the world, I found, my first impressions are that there's a lot of it and it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I can just see how much richness that's going to add to the storytelling in this game, and how much better it's going to make it for my players. As a player, would I buy this? Yes, but I would be very careful around reading the adventure seeds because it kind of spoils it if you know what's coming. Having said that, it depends very much on your GM and on what kind of style they've got. And that would be my. I think the adventure seeds aren't so detailed that you have to go with them exactly as they are. They're quite broad. But I really would. It's one of these books that I think as a player, actually reading through it, there are some lovely, lovely, lovely things in there to get your head around and read around and dig into. It really does enrich your understanding of the world that you're playing in, and I think from that point of view, it's a definite thumbs up for me. Certainly as a first impression. This is, sometimes you get books and you go, oh, that's an expansion book. Okay, that's useful. This is essential to me as a rule, as a GM. I think this is an essential book because it gives you so much stuff that you can get by with just the core book. You can get by with using other things, but this is just going to add so much to those games. That's my 2p's worth. I know that this is just a first impression, so those of you that have been living with this a little bit longer, what do you think? Is it essential? Is it just nice? What do you think? We've got a lot of content on Legend of the Five Rings, and we're going to go into some depth and detail on some of the aspects of this book and the other books, and how and some campaigns and bits and pieces. If you don't want to miss it, the easiest way to not miss it is to subscribe to the channel, and it would be brilliant to have you on board. I've really got captivated by this world, and I'm fascinated by it. I think it's an awesome game. Well done, FFG, and I'm really looking forward to Shadowlands next and seeing what you do with that, because that's going to be quite cool. The next upcoming expansion. So thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely evening, and see you next time.